So I'm going to continue reading Daniel. Daniel chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar's dream about a tree. I'm reading out of the NLT Bible. King Nebuchadnezzar sent this message to the people of King Nebuchadnezzar sent this message to the people of every race and nation and language throughout the world. Peace and prosperity to you. I want you all to know about the mere signs and wonders the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how powerful his wonders. His kingdom will last forever. His rule through all generations. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living in my palace in comfort and prosperity. But one night I had a dream that frightened me. I saw visions that terrified me as I laid in my bed. So I assured and ordered calling in all the wise men of Babylon, so they could tell me what my dream meant. When all the magicians and enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers came in, I told them the dream, but they could not tell me what it meant. At last, Daniel came in before me, and I told him the dream. He was named Belshazzar, after my God, and the spirit of the holy gods, is in him. I said to him, Belshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know the spirit of the holy God is in you, and that no mystery is too great for you to solve. Now tell me what my dream means. While I was laying in my bed, this is what I dreamed. I saw a large tree in the middle of the earth. The tree grew very tall and strong, reaching high into the heavens for all the world to see. It had fresh green leaves, and it was loaded with fruit for all to eat. Wild animals lived in its shade, and birds nested in its branches. All the world was fed from this tree. Then as I lay there dreaming, I saw a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven. The messenger shouted, Cut down the tree and lop off its branches. Shake off its leaves and scatter its fruit, and chase the wild animals from its shade, and the birds from its branches, but leave the stump and the roots in the ground. Bound with a band of iron and bronze, and surrounded by tender grass. Now let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the wild animals among the plants of the field for 7 periods of time. Let him have the mind of a wild animal instead of the mind of a human. And then it says, although Nebuchadnezzar praised Daniel's God, he still did not believe in him completely or submit to him alone. Many people attend church and use Christian language, but they really don't honor God with their lives. Profession doesn't always mean possession. Does your life match your profession of faith? For this has been decreed by my messengers. It is commanded by the Holy One, so that everyone may know that the Most High rules over the kingdom of the world. He gives them to anyone he chooses, even to the lowest people. Belshazzar, that was the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now tell me what it means, for none of the wise men of my kingdom can do so. But you can tell me, because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. One of the most difficult lessons to learn is that God is sovereign. He is above all of those who are above us. Leadership, government, authorities, cops. He's above everyone. He limits his power. He limits the power and authority of all government, businesses, and religious leaders in the world. Those who live in freedom and with a relatively high degree of Anthony find this difficult to understand. While we may feel as though we are free to do what we please, God is sovereign over all of us, sovereign over all of our plans and desires. Here's a little paragraph in my Bible. Nebuchadnezzar was one world leader who decided he could get more cooperation from the people he conquered by letting them keep their gods. Their lands he took, their riches he robbed, their lives he controlled, but their idols he allowed them to worship, sometimes even worship them himself. Nebuchadnezzar's plan worked well, with one glaring exception. When he conquered the little nation of Judah, he met a God who demanded exclusive worship, not just his share among many gods. In a sense, Nebuchadnezzar had always been able to rule the gods. This new God was different. This God dared to claim that he had made Nebuchadnezzar all that he was. One of the great conquerors in history was himself conquered by his creator. The Bible allows us to note that the ways in which God worked on Nebuchadnezzar, God allowed him victories, but he was accomplishing God's purposes. God allowed him to deport a man named Daniel, who would change the king's life. God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to attempt to kill 3 of his servants to teach the king that he did not really have power over life and death. God warned him of the dangers in his pride, and then allowed Nebuchadnezzar to live through 7 years of insanity before restoring him to the throne. God showed the king who was really in control. These lessons are clear to us today because of our place in history. When our attention shifts to our own lives, we often find ourselves unable to see how God is working. But we do have the advantage of God's word as our guide for today's challenges. We are commanded to obey God. We are also commanded to trust him. Trusting him covers those times when we are not sure about the outcome. God has entrusted us with this day how we trusted him with our life. So Daniel explains the dream to him. Upon hearing this, Daniel, also known as Belshazzar, was overcome for a time, frightened by the meaning of the dream. Then the king said to him, Belshazzar, don't be alarmed by the dream and what it means. Belshazzar replied, I wish the events foreshadowed in the dream would happen to your enemies, my lord, and not to you. The tree you saw was growing very tall and strong, reaching high into the skies for all the world to see. It had fresh green leaves and was loaded with fruit for all that to eat. Wild animals lived in its shade, and birds nested in its branches. That tree, your majesty, is you, for you have grown strong and great. Your greatness reaches up to heaven, and your rule to the ends of the earth. Then you saw a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump and the roots in the ground. Bound with a band of iron and bronze and surrounded by tender grass, let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the wild animals of the field for 7 periods of time. This is what the dream means, your majesty, and what the Most High has declared will happen to my lord the king. You will be driven from human society, and you will live in the fields with the wild animals. You will eat grass like a cow, and you will be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 periods of time will pass while you live this way, until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone he chooses. But the stump and roots of the tree were left in the ground. This means that you will receive your kingdom back when you have learned that the heavens rule. King Nebuchadnezzar, please accept my advice. Stop sinning and do what is right. Break from your wicked past and be merciful to the poor. Perhaps then you will continue to prosper. When Daniel understood Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he was stunned and he wondered how to speak the news. And he told the king he wished that the dream foreshadowed would happen to the king's enemies and not to Nebuchadnezzar. How could Daniel be so deeply grieved at the fate of Nebuchadnezzar, the king who was responsible for the destruction of Daniel's home and nation? Daniel had forgiven Nebuchadnezzar, and so God was able to use Daniel. Very often when we have been wronged by someone, we find it difficult to forget the past. We may ask, even be glad when that person suffers. Forgiveness means putting the past behind us. Can you love someone who has hurt you? Can you serve someone who has mistreated you? Ask God to help you forgive, forget, and love. God may use you in an extraordinary way in that person's life. Although much of the world thought that Nebuchadnezzar was a mighty, even divine king, God demonstrated that Nebuchadnezzar was an ordinary man. The king would go insane and become like an animal for a set period of time of 7 periods of time. God humiliated Nebuchadnezzar to show that Almighty God, that not Nebuchadnezzar, was Lord of the nations. No matter how powerful a person may become, self-centered pride will push God from his or her life. Pride may be one of the most dangerous temptations you will face. Don't let your accomplishments cause you to forget God. So Daniel was pleading with Nebuchadnezzar to change his ways, and God gave Nebuchadnezzar 12 months to do it. Unfortunately, there was no repentance in the heart of this proud king, and so the dream was fulfilled. The dream's fulfillment, Daniel verse 4:28. But all these things did happen to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, he was taking a walk on the flat roof of the royal palace in Babylon. And as he looked out across the city, he said, "Look at this great city of Babylon. By my own mighty power, I have built this beautiful city as my royal residence to display my magic splendor." While these words were still in his mouth, a voice called down from heaven, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, this message is for you. You are no longer ruler of this kingdom. You will be driven from human society, and you will live in the fields with the wild animals, and you will eat grass like a cow. 7 periods of time will pass while you live this way until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone he chooses." That same hour the judgment was fulfilled, and Nebuchadnezzar was driven from the human society. He ate grass like a cow, and he was drenched with the dew of heaven. He lived this way until his hair was as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like bird claws. Nebuchadnezzar decides to praises to God. After this time had passed, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven. My sanity returned, and I praised and worshiped the Most High and honored the one who lives forever. His root is everlasting, and his kingdom is eternal. All the people of the earth are nothing compared to him. He does as he pleases among the angels of heaven and among the people of the earth. No one can stop him or say to him, "What do you mean by doing these things?" When my sanity returned to me, so did my honor and glory and kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored as head of my kingdom, with even greater honor than before me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and glorify and honor the kingdom of heaven. All his acts are just and true, and he is able to humble the proud. Nebuchadnezzar's pilgrimage with God is one of the themes of this book. He acknowledged that God revealed mysteries to Daniel in Daniel chapter 3, verse 28, verse 29. He praised the God who rescued the free Hebrews. Despite Nebuchadnezzar's revelation that God exists and works great miracles in chapter Daniel 4, verse 30, we see that he still did not acknowledge God as his Lord. We may recognize that God exists and does wonderful miracles, but so do many unbelievers. To be a child of God, you must invite him to be your Lord of your life. Daniel chapter 5. The writing on the wall. Many years later, King Belshazzar gave a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking the wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver cups that his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. He wanted to drink from them with his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. So they brought these gold cups taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. While they drank from them, they praised their idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly they saw the fingers of a human hand writing on the plaster wall of the king's palace near the lampstand. The king himself saw the hand as it wrote, and his face turned pale with fright. His knees knocked together in fear, and his legs gave way beneath him. The king shouted for the enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers to be brought before him. He said to these wise men in Babylon, "Whoever can read this writing and tell me what it means will be dressed in purple robes of royal honor and will have a gold chain placed around his neck. He will become the third highest ruler in the kingdom." But when all the king's wise men had come in, none of them could read the writing and tell him what it meant. So the king grew even more alarmed, and his face turned pale. His nobles were shaking. But when the queen mother heard what was happening, she hurried to the banquet hall. She said to Belshazzar, "Long live the king. Don't be so pale and frightened. There is a man in your kingdom who has within him the spirit of the holy gods." During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, this man was found to have insight, understanding, and wisdom like that of the gods. Your predecessor king Nebuchadnezzar made him chief over all the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers of Babylon. This man Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar, has exceptional ability and is filled with divine knowledge and understanding. He can interpret the dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. So Daniel explains the writing. So Daniel was brought in before the king. The king asked him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles brought from Judah by my predecessor King Nebuchadnezzar? I have heard that you have the spirit of the gods within you, and that you are filled with insight, understanding, and wisdom. My wise men and enchanters have tried to read the words on the wall and tell me their meaning, but they could not do it. I am told that you can give interpretations and solve difficult problems. If you can read these words and tell me their meaning, you will be clothed in purple robes of royal honor, and you will have a gold chain placed around your neck. You will become the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Daniel answered the king, "Keep your gifts or give them to someone else, but I will tell you what the writing means. Your Majesty, the most holy God, has sovereignty, majesty, glory, and honor to your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. He made him so great that people of all races and nations and languages tremble before him in fear. He killed those he wanted to kill and spared those he wanted to spare. He honored those he wanted to honor and disgraced those he wanted to disgrace. But when his heart and mind were puffed up with ignorance, arrogance, he was brought down from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven from human society, and he was given the mind of a wild animal. And he lived among the wild donkeys, and he ate grass like a cow, and he was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he learned that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world, and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. You are an assessor, O Belshazzar, and you knew all this, yet you have not humbled yourself, for you have proudly defiled the Lord of heaven, and have had these cups from his temple brought before you. You and your nobles and your wives and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, while praising gods of silver, gold, bronze, and iron, wood, and stone, gods that neither see nor hear nor know anything at all. But you have not honored the God who gives you the breath of life and controls your destiny. So God has sent his hand to write these message. This message is that was written Mini, Tikio, and Pashan. This is what the words mean. Mini means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. Tiko means weighed. You have weighed on the balances and have not measured up. Persia means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was dressed in purple robes, a gold chain, and was hung around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Babylon king, was killed, and Darius the Media took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Daniel 6. Daniel in the lion's den. Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise the high officers and protect the king's interests. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers because of Daniel's great ability. The king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in why Daniel was handling the government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was a faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel would be in connection with the rules of his religion. So the administrators' high officers went to the king and said, long live the king Darius. We are all in agreement. We administrators, officials, and high officers, advisors, and governors, that the king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the dens of lions. And now, your majesty, the issue and the sign this law, so it cannot be changed, an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. So King Darius signed the law. The jealous administrators and officers couldn't find anything about Daniel's life to criticize, so they attacked his religion. If you face jealous critics because of your faith, be glad they're criticizing that part of your life. Perhaps they had to focus on your religion as a last resort. Respond by continuing to believe and live as you should. Then remember that God is in control, fighting this battle for you. At this time, Daniel was over 80 years old and one of their top 3 administrators. Daniel was working with those who did not believe in his God, but he worked more efficiently and capable than all the rest. Thus he attracted the attention of the pagan king and earned a place of respect. One of the best ways to influence non-Christian employers is to work diligently and responsibility. How well do you represent God to your employer? Excel. You will find that coworkers may look for ways to hold you back and tear you down. How should you deal with those who would cheer at your downfall and even try to hasten it? Conduct your life above reproach, then you will have nothing to hide, and your enemies will have a difficult time finding legitimate charges against you. Of course, this will not always save you from attacks, and like Daniel, you will have to rely on God for protection. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its window open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. So they went straight to the king and reminded him about his law. Did you not sign a law that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions? Yes, the king replied. That decision stands. It is an official law of the Medes and the Persians that cannot be revoked. Then they told the king, that man Daniel, one of the captives, from Judah, is ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day. Hearing this, the king was deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. He spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of this predicament. In the evening, the men went together to the king and said, Your Majesty, you know that according to the new law of the Medes and the Persians, no law that the king signs can be changed. So at last the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. The king said to him, May your God whom you serve so faithfully rescue you. A stone was brought in place over the mouth of the den. The king sealed the stone with his own royal seal and the seals of his nobles, so that no one could rescue Daniel. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night fasting. He refused his unusual entertainment and couldn't sleep all night. Very early the next morning, the king got up and hurried out to the lion's den. When he got there, he called out in anguish, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you serve so faithfully able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, Long live the king. My God sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth, so that they will not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight. And I have not wronged you, my majesty. The king was overjoyed and ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. Then the king gave orders to arrest the men who had maliciously accused Daniel. He had them thrown into the lions' den along with their wives and children. The lions leaped on them and tore them apart before they even hit the floor of the den. Then King Darius sent this message to the people of every race and nation and language throughout the world. Peace and prosperity to you. I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his rule will never end. He rescues and saves his people. He performs miracle signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prepared during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Daniel stood alone, although he knew about the law against praying to anyone except the king. He continued to pray 3 times a day as he always had. Daniel had a disciplined prayer life. Our prayers are usually interrupted, not by threats, but simply by the pressure of our schedules. Don't let threats or pressures cut you into your prayer time. Pray regularly, no matter what, for prayer is your lifeline to God. Daniel made no attempt to hide his daily prayer routine from his enemies in government, even though he knew he would be disobeying the new law. Hiding his daily prayers would have been futile, because surely the conspirators would have caught him at something else during the month. Also, hiding would have demonstrated that he was afraid of the other governor officials. Daniel continued to pray because he could not look to the king for the guidance and strength that he needed during this difficult time. Only God could provide that what he really needed. The person who trusts in God and obeys his will is untouchable until God takes him or her. To trust God is to have a merciful peace. God who delivered Daniel will deliver you. Do you trust him for your life? Daniel 7. Daniel had many dreams and visions he did not understand. He dreamed of 4 beasts, which represented 4 kingdoms of the world, and of a ram and goat, which displayed 2 of those kingdoms in greater detail. Daniel's visions revealed that the Messiah would be the ruler of a spiritual kingdom that will overpower and overshadow all the earthly kingdoms. These visions help us see that we should interpret all of history in light of God's eternal kingdom. Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts, chapter 7. Earlier during the first year of King Belshazzar's reign in Babylon, Daniel had a dream and saw visions as he laid in his bed. He wrote down the dream, and this is what he saw. In my vision that night, I, Daniel, saw a great storm churning the surface of a great sea, with strong winds blowing from every direction. The 4 huge beasts came up out of this water. Each different from the others. The first beast was like a lion with eagle's wings. As I watched, its wings were pulled off, and it was left standing with its 2 hind feet on the ground like a human being, and it was given a human eye. Then I saw a second beast, and it looked like a bear. It was rearing up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And I heard a voice saying to it, "Get up, devour the flesh among many people." Then the third of these strange beasts appeared, and it looked like a leopard. It had 4 birds' wings on its back, and it had 4 heads. Great authority was given to the beast. Then in my vision that night I saw a fourth beast, terrifying, dreadful, and very strong. It devoured and crushed its victims with huge iron teeth and trampled their remains beneath its feet. It was different from any of the other beasts, and it had 10 horns. As I was looking at the horns, suddenly another small horn appeared among them. 3 of the horns were torn out by the roots to make room for it, and this little horn had eyes like human eyes and a mouth that was boosting ignorantly. Chronically, this chapter takes place before 5. At the time, Belshazzar had been given a portion of authority in 553 BC, and Daniel was probably in his late 60s. The first 6 chapters of Daniel present the history. The last 6 chapters are visions relating mainly to the future. Daniel had a vision of 4 huge beasts, each representing a world empire. This was similar to Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar's dream covered the political aspects of the empires. Daniel's dream, despite their moral characteristics, these nations which would reign over Israel were evil and cruel. But Daniel also saw God's everlasting and Jezebel kingdom arrive and conquer them all. The lion with eagle wing represents Babylon, with its swift conquest. Statues of winged lions have been recovered from Babylon's ruins. The bear that ravaged the lion is Medo-Persia. The 3 ribs in its mouth represented the conquest of the 3 major enemies. The leopard is Greece. Its wings show the swiftness of Alexander the Great's campaign, as he conquered much of the civilized world in the 4 years of 330 BC. The leopard's 4 heads are the 4 divisions of the Greek Empire after Alexander's death. The 4th beast points to the Rome in the end of times. Many Bible scholars believe that the horns correspond to the 10 kings who will reign shortly before God sets up his everlasting kingdom. These 10 kings had still not come to power at the time of John's vision, recorded in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 17, verse 12. The vision recorded in the book of Revelation. The little horn is a future human ruler, or the Antichrist. See also 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, verse 4. God is illustrating the final end of all worldly kingdoms in contrast to his eternal kingdom. In the book of Revelation, John also recorded a vision of a sacred beast, scarlet beast, that had 7 heads and 10 horns in Revelation chapter 17, verse 3. The angel told John that the 10 horns were 10 kings. Revelation chapter 17, verse 12. Most likely these would be 10 rulers who will rule under the Antichrist. The number 10 may be little, or more likely it symbolizes the totality of the powers on earth that were serve the Antichrist and war against Christ. In John's day, Rome was the world power, but would be followed by other powers. Whoever the 10 kings are, they will give their power to the Antichrist and will make the war against Christ and his followers. Back to the scripture, Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. I watched as thrones were put in place, and the Ancient One sat to judge. His clothing was as white as snow, and his hair was like purest wool. He sat on a fiery throne, with wheels of blazing fire. And a river of fire was pouring out flowing from his presence. Millions of angels ministered to him. Many millions stood to attend him. Then the court began its session, and the books were opened. I continued to watch because I could hear the little horn's boastful speech. I kept watching until the fourth beast was killed and its body was destroyed by fire. The other three beasts had their authority taken from them, but they were allowed to live a while longer. As my vision continued that night, I saw someone like a son of man coming with clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient One and was led into his presence. He was given authority, honor, and sovereignty over all the nations of the world, so that people of every race, nation, and language would obey him. Reminds me of Revelation. So that people of every race and nation and language would obey him, his rule and eternal. It will never end. His kingdom will never be destroyed. The vision is explained to Daniel. I, Daniel, was troubled by all I had seen, and my visions terrified me. So I approached one of those standing beside the throne and asked him what it all meant. I asked him what it all meant. He explained it to me like this. These four huge beasts represent four kingdoms that will arise from the earth. But in the end, the holy people of the Most High will be given the kingdom, and they will rule forever and ever. Then I wanted to know the true meaning of the fourth beast, the one so different from the others, and so terrifying. It had devoured and crushed its victims with iron teeth and bronze claws, trampling their remains beneath its feet. I also asked about the 10 horns on the fourth beast's head and the little horn that came up afterward and destroyed 3 of the other horns. This horn had seemed greater than the others, and it had human eyes and a mouth that was boosting ignorantly. And as I watched, this horn was waging war against God's holy people and was defeating them, until the Ancient One, the Most High, came and judged in favor of his holy people. Then the time arrived for the holy people to take over the kingdom. Then he said to me, this fourth beast is the fourth world power that will rule the earth. It will be different from all the others. It will devour the whole world, trampling and crushing everything in its path. Its 10 horns are the 10 kings who will rule the empire. Then another king will arise, different from the other 10 who will subdue 3 of them. He will defy the Most High and oppress the holy people of the Most High, and he will try to change their sacred festivals and laws, and they will be placed under his control for a times and half a time. But the court will pass judgment, and all his power will be taken away and completely destroyed. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be given to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will last forever, and all the rulers will serve and obey him. That was the end of the vision. I, Daniel, was terrified by my thoughts, and my face was pale with fear. But I kept these things to myself. Here the prophecy shifts to the end times. This judgment scene is similar to the one that was seen by the Apostle John in Revelation chapter 1, verse 14, verse 15. The Ancient One is Almighty, who assigns power to the kingdoms, and who will himself judge those kingdoms in the end. The book of Revelation records a similar picture of God with angels surrounding his throne. John recorded that there were thousands and millions. Revelation chapter 5, verse 11, verse 12. In other words, too many angels to count surround God's throne and minister to him. Created by God, angels are spiritual beings who help carry out his work on earth. The phrase "the books were open" refers to judgment. Revelation refers to this final judgment, where the books were open, including the books of life. And the dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books, Revelation 20, verse 12. The book of life is the heavenly registry of those who have accepted Christ's gift of salvation. Revelation chapter 3, verse 5. All believers' names are written in the book of life, and they need not fear judgment. Unbelievers, however, will be judged according to their works, but their works, no matter how good, will not be able to save them. Daniel saw God judging millions of people as they stand before him. We all must stand before our Almighty God and give an account of our lives. And if your life were judged by God today, what would you say about it? How would you measure it against His will for you? We should live each day with the full awareness that we must appear before God to give account for how we use our life. How will you measure how will your life measure up? The slaying of the beast represents the fall of Rome. While this beast was destroyed, the other beasts were allowed to live for a period of time, and the kingdoms of their cultures continued to be recognizable. In some form, history did not end when God intervened with His judgment. This one, like a son of man, is the Messiah. Jesus used the verse to refer to Himself in Matthew chapter 26, verse 64. In Luke chapter 21, verse 27, and John chapter 1, verse 51. The clouds of heaven portray the Son of Man as divine. Throughout the Bible, clouds represent His majesty and awesome presence. God's glory appeared in the cloud in Exodus chapter 16, verse 10, and 19, verse 9 in Exodus. At the giving of the law of Sinai, Revelation also recorded Christ coming with the clouds of heaven in Revelation chapter 1, verse 7. The holy people of the Most High are the true Israel. The people ruled by the Messiah. Jesus Christ gave the kingdom to the new Israel, His church, made of all faithful believers, His coming assured, and the kingdom of God, and all the believers are its citizens. Although God may allow persecution to continue for a while, the destiny of His followers is to possess the kingdom and be with Him forever. Daniel chapter 7, verse 21, verse 22. This horn that rages war against God's people is also described in Revelation as the beast who is allowed to wage war against God's people and to conquer them. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 17. For a while the horn will defeat God's people, yet in reality those who die for their faith will be the ultimate overcomers, for they will receive the great rewards. In the end, however, the horn will be defeated by the Ancient One Himself. Daniel chapter 7, verse 24. The 10 horns, or the 10 kings, are also mentioned in Revelation chapter 17, verse 12. There will also be 10 toes in Nebuchadnezzar's vision. Revelation 2, verse 41 and 42. While all do not agree concerning the identity of these 10 kings, we are reminded in Revelation chapter 17, verse 12, verse 14, that these kings will make war against Christ, but as the King of Kings, He will conquer them. The other king mentioned here in verse 24 is the future man of lawlessness. We read that in 2 Colossians chapter 2, verse 3, verse 4. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. The exact meaning of this times, and half the time is debated. And many scholars believe that the time means 1 year, times means 2 years, and a half a time means half a year. Thus this word refers to 3.5 years. God's people would be placed under the king's control, and the persecution will continue only a relative shorter time. God has promised to give His kingdom to His holy people. Eight, 9, So I will read 8 and then be done. Daniel's vision of a ram and goat. During the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, saw another vision following the one that had already appeared to me. In this vision, I was at the fortress of Susa in province of Elam, standing beside the river. As I looked up, I saw a ram with 2 big long horns standing beside the river. One of the horns was longer than the other, even though it had grown later than the other one. The ram butted everything out of his way to the west, to the north, and to the south, and no one could stand against him or help his victims. He did as he pleased and became very great. While I was watching, suddenly a male goat appeared from the west, crossing the land so swiftly that he didn't even touch the ground. The goat, which had one very large horn between its eyes, headed toward the 2-horned ram, and I had seen standing beside the river, rushing at him in a rage. The goat charged furiously at the ram and struck him, breaking off both his horns. Now the ram was helpless, and the goat knocked him down and trampled him. No one could rescue the ram from the goat's power. The goat became very powerful, but at the height of his power, his large horn was now broken off. In the large horn's place grew 4 prominent horns, pointing in the 4 directions of the earth. Then from one of the prominent horns came a small horn, whose power grew very great. It turned toward the south, and the east, and toward the glorious land of Israel. Its power reached to the heavens, where it attacked the heavenly army, throwing some of the heavenly beings and some of the stars to the ground and trampling them. It even challenged the commander of heaven's army by canceling the daily sacrifices offered to him and by destroying his temple. The army of heaven was restrained from responding to this rebellion, so the daily sacrifices was halted and truth was overthrown. The horn succeeded in everything it did. Then I heard 2 holy ones talking to each other. One of them asked, "How long will events of this vision last? How long will the rebellion that causes desecration stop the daily sacrifices? How long will the temple and heaven's army be trampled on?" And the other replied, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the temple will be made right again." As then Gabriel angel explains the vision. As I, Daniel, was trying to understand the meaning of this vision, someone who looked like a man stood in front of me, and I heard a human voice calling out from the Ulai River, "Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of this vision." As Gabriel approached the place where I was standing, I became terrified. I fell with my face to the ground. "Son of man," he said, "you must understand that the events you have seen in your vision relate to the time of the end." While he was speaking, I fainted and lay there with my face to the ground, but Gabriel aroused me with a touch and helped me up to my feet. Then he said, "I am here to tell you what will happen later in a time of wrath. What you have seen pertains to the very end of time. The 2-horned ram represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy male goat represents the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes represents the first king of the Greek Empire. The 4 prominent horns that replaced the one large horn show that the Greek Empire will break into the 4 kingdoms, but not of as great as the first. At the end of their rule, when their sin is at its height, a fierce king, a master of intertruge, will rise to power. He will become very strong, and not by his own power. He will cause a shocking amount of destruction and succeed in everything he does. He will destroy the powerful leaders and devastate the holy people. He will be a master of deception and will become ignorant ignorant, and he would destroy many without warning, and he would even take on the prince of princes in battle, but he would be broken through not by human power. This vision about the 2,300 evenings and mornings is true, but none of these things will happen for a long time, so keep this vision a secret. Then I, Daniel, was overcome and as sick for several days. Afterward I got up and performed my duties for the king, but I was greatly troubled by this vision and could not understand it. Daniel chapter 8 verse 2. Susa was one of the capitals of Babylonian Empire, located in what is now Iran. Susa was a well-developed city. It was the winter capital of the Persian Empire and a mighty fortress. In his vision, Daniel saw himself in this important location. The earliest known code of law, the Code of Hambari, was found there. Susa aroused Babylon itself a cultural sophistication. Daniel chapter 8 verse 3. Two horns were the kings of Media and Persia. The long horn represented the growing dominance of Persia and the Medo-Persian Empire. Daniel chapter 8 verse 5 or 7. The goat representing Greece, its large horn, Alexander Great. This is an amazing prediction because Greece was not yet considered a world in power when this prophecy was given. Alexander the Great conquered the world with great speed and military strategy, indicated by the goat's rapid movement. The shattering of both horns symbolized Alexander breaking both parts of the Medo-Persian Empire. Daniel chapter 8 verse 8. Alexander the Great died in his 30s at the height of his power. His kingdom was split into 4 parts under 4 generals: Partly I of Egypt and Palestine, Silas of Babylonia and Syria, Daniel chapter 8 verse 9. Israel, the glorious land, was attacked by Antidosh, I don't know how to say that word. The small horn in the 2nd century BC. He was the 8th ruler of the Sylvan Empire, Babylon, and Syria. He overthrew the Israel's high priest, looted in temple, and replaced worship of God with a Greek form of worship. A further fulfillment of this prophecy of a powerful horn will occur in the future with the coming of the Antichrist. See 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 4. Daniel chapter 8 verse 11. The commander of heaven's army here refers to a heavenly authority, perhaps an angel or even God himself. See also Joshua chapter 5 verse 13 verse 15. The phrase Daniel chapter 8 verse 14, the phrase evenings and mornings means even morning sacrifices and refers to the time from the desecration of the altar in the temple by the Antiochus to the restoration of the temple worship under the Judas Maccabees in 165 BC. Daniel chapter 8 verse 16. Gabriel is an angel, the heavenly messenger God used to explain Daniel's visions. He also announced the birth of John the Baptist in Luke chapter 1 verse 11, and the Messiah in Luke chapter 1 verse 26. Daniel chapter 8 verse 17. The time of the end in this air case refers to the whole period from the end of the exile until the second coming of Christ. Many of the events that would have happened under interest IV will be repeated on a border scale just before Christ's second coming. During these times, God deals with Israel in a rationally different way, with divine discipline coming through Gentile nations. This time is sometimes referred to as a period of the Gentiles in Luke chapter 2 verse 1 verse 24. Daniel chapter 8, verse 25. The Prince of Princes is God himself. No human power could defeat the king whom Daniel saw in his vision, but God would bring him down. And Charles I reportedly went insane and died in Persia in 164 BC. God's power and justice were profound, so we should never give up our faith or lose hope, no matter how powerful God's enemies may seem. Nine, 10. So I'll finish 9 tomorrow or later tonight. 9, 10, 11, 12.